Hello and welcome back to the Peter Mackay Motorsport Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Today we're going to talk all about Moto GP and the final round in Valencia in Spain and all of the comings and goings around that event. Now, Valencia is the traditional season finale venue for MotoGP, and we've seen some wonderful conclusions to MotoGP championships there. But this year, it was more what was happening off the track than on the track that was creating the headlines. As we all know, the championships was long wrapped up by now six-time world champion in MotoGP, Marc Marquez, in 8 in all classes. So that was put to bed, and it was only the team's championship that was left to decide, and that was between HRC Honda, which is Marc Marquez and Jorge Lorenzo, and the Ducati team of Andrea Dovizioso and Danilo Petrucci. Now, as we know, Jorge Lorenzo has not had the easiest season, and we will get on to talking about him in a moment. So Marc Marquez basically was left on his own to take on the might of Ducati all by himself. And in fact, it was not a good race for Ducati at all, and it was a very good race for Marc Marquez with a win in his final round of the year. And HRC Repsol Honda took the team's championship despite having one of their riders well off the pace and also injured for a major part of the season. But almost everything was thrown into insignificance on Thursday when Jorge Lorenzo called an exceptional press conference in the morning where the chief executive of Dorna, the series organisers, the series owner, Carmelo Ezpeleta, would be in attendance. Now, Carmelo Ezpeleta, if he's being specifically called into a press conference alongside a rider, it usually means one thing, and that means that the rider is going to announce their retirement. And that was what Jorge Lorenzo decided to do. Now, Jorge Lorenzo has had a glittering career in MotoGP. He's won the World Championship on 3 occasions, and he's beaten the best in the business at their best. He beat Valentino Rossi in 2010. He beat Casey Stoner in 2012, and he beat Marc Marquez and Valentino Rossi in 2015. So all of the best riders of the modern MotoGP era, Jorge Lorenzo's faced them at their very peak and beaten them. A number of race wins, I think 44 race wins with Yamaha, 3 with Ducati. Sadly, none with Honda, but it just wasn't to be. Jorge Lorenzo's had some horrific injuries in his career, which have really pushed him back at times. And this year was no different. He actually came into the season with a number of injuries, and actually in June in Assen actually broke his back and missed a couple of months of the season. Now, I personally felt very sorry for Jorge Lorenzo because he came back from breaking his back. Imagine that, you've broken your back and you come back to riding a nearly 300 horsepower prototype motorcycle with carbon brakes and all these kinds of things. And you've got to come back and do that, and straight away everybody says, well, you're rubbish, you're running around at the back. And I'm sure there was nobody that thought that more than Jorge himself. He knows what he's capable of. We've seen him win so many races just clearing off in front of everybody else and making everyone look quite silly. It was quite sad to see him, so badly injured and getting such a pasting in the press as well. So I think he felt that it was time, or he stated in his press conference that he didn't feel it was worth it anymore, and it was time to step away from the sport. A brave decision to make. It would have been easy just to carry on and chase around in circles, but I think he's made the right decision, especially if he's battling with physical issues from injuries. case, I think he's made the right call. He'll be sorely missed in the sport. He's always played a little bit of the pantomime villain, actually, in MotoGP. I think any rider who has come up against the ever popular Valentino Rossi head to head is never going to make themselves popular. We've seen it with Casey Stoner. He wasn't a particularly popular rider. Marc Marquez is getting there, but still there's a big faction of the MotoGP fan base that really doesn't like Marc Marquez. And I think a big root part of that is because all of these riders have faced up to and caused big problems for, the legend that is Valentino Rossi. So I think Jorge Lorenzo suffered a little bit from that. And of course, he came into the Yamaha team in 2008 alongside Valentino Rossi in his absolute prime. And he came in and was very, very fast to start with, having pole positions and podiums and wins early on, and then started to have some massive crashes, which did, calm him down a bit. But in 2009, he came up against Rossi. We held him really, really strongly, but still Rossi won the title. But in 2010, Jorge Lorenzo put together a season much like Marc Marquez has this season, actually. I think he was only off the podium on one occasion and won a lot of races and was completely dominant on the Yamaha M1 and won the season early at Sepang in Malaysia. He really will be missed. He's a completely unique character. Jorge Lorenzo, almost slightly fragile mentally, but when his head was in the right place and he felt comfortable, he was incredible on a motorcycle. So wish him well. You never know. He's said the possibility of wild cards in the future as a potential. There's talk of Suzuka 8-hour and things like that. So you never know. We might see him on a motorbike again. We might see him racing cars. We might see him on the beach in Bali on his Instagram feed. Whatever he decides to do, enjoy it, Jorge. You've deserved it after many years in the sport. So, this big bombshell announcement, it leaves one of the most coveted places on the grid open. Now, a seat as an HRC factory Repsol Honda rider is what every rider dreams of when they grow up. At this current moment in time, it's clear that the HRC Honda bike is actually a very tricky machine to get speed out of, particularly if you're a rookie in the series as well. And it's very, very clear that Marc Marquez appears to be the only guy who can actually get, who can get the pace out of it. And you just look at how many wins other Honda riders have had compared to Marc Marquez. Marc Marquez has outscored all of the other Honda riders put together by 4 times. He's massive. I think it's something like 57 wins, and the other Honda riders are at 12 or 13 wins. So the last teammate of Marc Marquez to win a MotoGP race was Dani Pedrosa back in Valencia 2 years ago in 2017. So it's almost a little bit of a poison chalice. Yes, you get to be a Repsol Honda rider, which is a big dream. I'm sure it's a good salary as well. But you've got to go in alongside Marc Marquez, which is tough, and on a bike which is renowned for being a little bit edgy, a little bit spiky. So straight away the rumours started to flow around who was going to go on that bike. Was it Johan Zarco? The Frenchman. He's done a couple of races on the LCR Honda, with not too bad performances. He's had a tough year though in general on the KTM, so his name was bandied around. Takumi Takahashi, Takaki Nakagami, Cal Crutchlow. These names were all talked about, and they could make a very credible case for all of these riders as well. But there was one name that circled around a lot, and that's the reigning, or the just crowned new Moto2 world champion, Alex Marquez. Now, Alex Marquez, the younger brother of Marc, has unfortunately had a bit of the Ralf Schumacher in the case of always being a little bit in the shadow of his brother. But I think the difference with Alex is that we forget that back in 2014, Alex won the Moto3 World Championship up against Jack Miller, who's now renowned as one of the top riders in MotoGP. He was on the podium. He was third at the weekend there. And also, Alex came into, so he graduated up to Moto 2 and took a number of years to get used to the Moto 2 machine. He's quite a tall rider, which is normally not very good for the Moto 2 bike, being a light bike. But this year, clearly, when moving to the Triumph engine, a little bit more power, a little bit more torque, has definitely seemed to have suited Alex's style a little bit more, and he won the championship in one of the most competitive racing series in the world. So it emerged on the day after the race that it would be Alex Marquez who would be released from his contract as a Mark VDS Moto2 rider for the 2020 season. That contract's been quietly put in the bin, and Alex has been he's been promoted up to the HRC Repsol Honda team. So him and his brother Mark will take on the championship together next year for Repsol Honda. And this is coming from the sort of entertainment side and the PR side of MotoGP, these are the sort of stories that get column inches in more general publications. They get more attention on the television. These things are really, really important. It's not that we should make our sport full of gimmicks, not quite the opposite, but clearly when you've got someone who's just won the Moto2 World Championship, well, they deserve a MotoGP seat more than most. So, and it's just almost a nice convenience that he could come along and join his brother at the Repsol Honda team. And of course, he will get far more guidance from his teammate, being his brother, than he would from anybody else on the grid. So I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. I think we would be foolish to say that Alex could come in, particularly on a Honda. If he were on a Yamaha, it might be a different story. But to come in on that difficult, edgy, fickle Honda and come in and score results early on, I think we would be foolish to say that's going to happen. But I think what we'll see is progression over over his first couple of years in the top class. So good, best of luck to him. Right, so we talked about Honda, we talked about them enough, let's talk about Yamaha. So Yamaha was quite a contrasting fortunes, and what we saw in Valencia was quite a good representation of what we've seen across the season. Fabio Quartararo on the SRT Petronas Yamaha, which is the satellite bike, so the kind of privateer bike below the factory team. We understand that in the later part of the season, Fabio Quartararo's bike has been given a few more upgrades to bring it more towards the specification of the full factory Movistar Yamaha, Monster Energy Yamaha team. But it's still a team. And bearing in mind this, the SRT Petronas Yamaha team, this is their first year in MotoGP. It's extraordinary what they've achieved this year, not just with Fabio Quartararo, who's had lots of pole positions and plenty podium finishes. They've also had Franco Morbidelli as well, doing incredibly well, always performing consistently, regularly in the top 5 or 6 places. So what they've done is quite extraordinary. The factory Yamaha guys, Maverick Vinales and Valentino Rossi, they've not had the season that they would have liked. Maverick Vinales has managed to score two race wins at Sepang and in Assen in Holland. I was at that race. It was a good race. But in general, Maverick Vinales he's always never quite been able to convert on the promise of free practice and sometimes qualifying as well. And he's always seemed to have faltered in races, often struggles in the early stages of a race. Struggling to get the tyres up to temperature, struggling with the full tank of fuel, that kind of thing, and then only makes his charge often when it's far too late towards the end of the race. However, we did see in Aragon a track with lots of wonderful, fast, swooping corners throughout the lap, and then towards the end of the lap in the final sector, there's one massive, long downhill straight, and he was getting absolutely pasted by particularly Andrea Dovizioso on his Ducati, but also Marc Marquez on the Honda as well. He was cleared off and into the distance. So it's clearly it's very, very obvious that Yamaha are really, really far behind on straight line pace. So much so that if they have any ambitions to win World Championships, they have to get more horsepower in, otherwise they have not got a hope, because the bike is very clearly it's almost it's almost vividly obvious to the naked eye watching the television just how much quicker through the corners the Yamaha is. But even then, to still not be able to win the races with that amount of corner speed is hugely frustrating. So big changes need to be made over the winter for Yamaha. They've had one Riders' World Championship since Marc Marquez came into the championship. This is something that they will really want to address. We also saw at the weekend Valentino Rossi, floundering around at just inside the top 10 and no more. Now that's not what we're used to seeing with Valentino Rossi. We know that he's more capable than that. And Valencia's never been one of his favourite circuits, mind you, but we know that he's got more in the tank than that, and it's just needing a wee bit more horsepower. It just seems that appears to be the only piece of the jigsaw that's left for that Yamaha motorcycle. Now, most of the chat at the weekend, bearing in mind we're in 2019 still, most of the chat at the weekend was going on about 2021 contracts, because at the end of 2020, more or less the entire Moto GP grid are out of contract. So everything's up for grabs, everything's up for bidding, everything's up for discussion. So the rumours getting thrown around are crazy, considering we're we're 18 months away from the start of that particular season. So it's amazing, but already Ducati making noises about making a move for Fabio Quartararo, taking him away from Yamaha, also trying to court Maverick Vinales as well. Interestingly, Lynn Jarvis, the managing director of the Yamaha MotoGP team, came out in the press and said that they do not wish to pursue Marc Marquez. Their aim is very clear, and it's to beat Marc Marquez on his Honda with their own rider on the Yamaha motorcycle. So they don't want to bring in Marc Marquez to be able to win the titles for them. And I find that an interesting stance, because the stats since Marc Marquez came into the sport are very, very clear of just how dominant he is and what a difference he's made. And I think in MotoGP it's clear that the rider still can make a very, very big difference as well. That being said, Marc Marquez is very comfortable at Honda and is doing very well, so it could be that he's quite happy staying where he is. But I do find it funny that Yamaha, they've done in the past, in 2000, at the end of 2003, they were an unsuccessful team. They weren't winning anything. They were really, really struggling. They were towards the back of the grid, and they somehow managed to convince Valentino Rossi to come along, to leave the power of HRC, Repsol Honda, and to come over to Yamaha. And it was a huge shock at the time. But what happened? The very first race, boom, Rossi won at Welcome in South Africa. And a wonderful duel with Max Biaggi. Now, as we know, here we are, nearly 16 years later, Valentino Rossi is still racing for the team despite a 2-year hiatus with Ducati, but the less said about that the better. But all of his time at Yamaha, he's had multitude of wins, pole positions, championship titles in 2004, 2005, 2008 and 2009. So it's when they've gone and pursued the star rider to change their fortunes, it has worked for them in the past, and that's the bit that I'm kind of confused about. However, you can see that they might be reticent to say, if Marquez comes to Yamaha and then doesn't win, then Yamaha look bad. I personally don't think that would happen, but that is certainly a risk or a possibility. So, but the problem is that if Yamaha are basically saying we're putting our long-term bets on particularly Fabio Quartararo, but Maverick Vinales as well. Now, if Ducati manage to steal one, if not both of these riders, then where do Yamaha go then? because there doesn't appear to be any other threat to dethroning Marc Marquez in the near future. And yes, Fabio Quartararo is probably the most likely candidate to take that fight to Marc Marquez with a well-sorted Yamaha. I think he's the guy who's clearly got the raw speed to do that. He's proven that this year on a number of occasions, that he's able to at least put pressure on him. But if Ducati come in with a big budget and they take Quartararo away, well, then you're snookered. So that's the bit that I'm struggling to understand, that at least Yamaha wouldn't at least throw their hat in the ring. And you never know how bike development might go in the next year or so. It could be that the Honda becomes more difficult, the Yamaha keeps up, and who knows. It's all a long way away. But it seems now in Moto GP the memory of people in the paddock is getting shorter all the time. You just have to look at the situation with Jorge Lorenzo. With his results, everyone forgot just what his credentials were very, very quickly. But also people are looking so much further into the distance in terms of making signings and things like that. We saw, you're seeing riders getting signed up right at the beginning of the season for the following season before they've even got started and seen what the form was. So MotoGP it's an interesting place at the moment. Now, the last one I want to talk about is Johann Zarco. We mentioned him earlier in the show. Johann Zarco, he had a terrible time at KTM. He joined them this year as a fully paid up factory rider on a 2-year contract. By the summertime, he decided to leave the team, and shortly after he was dismissed from the team. And by good fortune, Johann Zarco managed to find himself a ride at LCR Honda for the last 3 races of the season, because poor old Takaki Nakagami had to go and get a shoulder operation, and that opened up the opportunity. And he gave a good account of himself, didn't set the world on fire, but gave a decent account of himself, and enough that it looks like there are options on the table for him to remain in MotoGP next year. It appears like there is an option with Ducati. He's been photographed coming out of the Ducati motorhome with bosses Gigi Dall'Igna and Paolo Ciabatti standing at the top of the stairs, so that they're not going to have a chat with him for no reason. So it looks like he may go to the private Avintia team, but with a higher specification of bike than that team currently uses. And it appears that Carmelo Espeleta from Dorna is very, very keen to keep Johan in the championship, keep the Frenchman in the championship, and also someone of his character as well. His other option, it appears, is that he may be able to go back to Moto2 and race for the championship leading Mark VDS team. That might not be such a bad idea. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go back to Moto2 and win the championship again. He's just that sort of rider. He's a curious character, Johann Zarco, and you just don't know what Johann Zarco you're going to get sometimes. So that's MotoGP season over, which is always a sad time of the year, mid-November. It just seems like it just comes round so quickly every year, and that's us until March at Qatar for the races. However, the guys in MotoGP will have a couple of tests at Sepang, like normal, around January, February time as well, and that's always a really good barometer to see what to expect throughout the season. Alex Marquez, he's going to have a really busy winter, lots of training and lots of practice on his new HRC Repsol Honda bike as well. So as and when things come up, we'll talk about those. Probably do a podcast on the next major test, see how things are going, see if Yamaha managed to get a few more horsepower in there as well. Before I go, just a wee reminder, if you're enjoying the show, please don't forget to subscribe on your chosen podcast platform. My personal favourite is Podbean. I quite like Podbean. Unfortunately, we can't get it on Spotify yet. I'm having some problems getting Spotify to talk to my RSS feed. That's RSS feeds and all these sorts of things. It's very all gobbledygook to me as a junior podcaster. But yeah, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, Castbox. You can get it on all these sorts of places, or you can get it on my website as well, petermackaymotorsport.com. I would love to hear from you on the show. If you have any questions that you'd like me to read out on the show, I'd be delighted to do so. So you can get in touch via our Facebook page, which is the Peter Mackay Motorsport Podcast. You can get in touch via Instagram at Peter Mackay Motorsport, or via our Twitter, which is at Mackay Podcast. I'd be delighted to hear from you, and I do hope you get in touch. So thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Peter Mackay Motorsport Podcast, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.